Today, I am just outside of Bagdad, Arizona, ready to kick off my next summer adventure.
And over the next 4 parts, I'll be traversing the central and northern portions of the state as I head east from Bagdad all the way to Apache-Made Mountain on the other side of I-17. Along the way, I would stick to mostly high elevation routes, crossing through the Prescott, Kaibab, and Coconino National Forests, as well as the mighty Verde Valley, all of which would be loaded with some tremendous views and vistas. From abandoned mines to historic cabins and structures, this adventure would have no shortage of neat places to explore. The drive would feature a mix of smooth dirt roads, along with some rougher trails thrown in, as I make my way through the heart of Arizona on this 5-day, 250-mile adventure. This is the North Central Arizona Special.
Hello everybody and welcome to another summer special. I'm Scotty, and of course, as you can see, this is going to be another solo trip. Unfortunately, Daniel wasn't able to make it out here this summer. Things have been a little bit hectic and chaotic to say the least, so we're in talks. We're hoping to get him back out end of this year, maybe early next year, but we'll see when the schedules align. But in the meantime, the adventure must continue, and I am kicking off my 5-day adventure across kind of north and central Arizona as I head east from Bagdad here, the small mining town, over to Apache-Made on the other side of I-17. Should be a really great time, lots to see as you saw in the opener, and I'm really excited to be enjoying some cooler weather and a little bit of summer adventure. So I'm going to get aired down here, tell you a little more about the route, and then we'll be underway.
A couple miles outside the mining town of Bagdad, I got to work on airing down the tires. This was a quick process that only took a few minutes. While I waited, I enjoyed the view, which included some grass-covered mesas and rocky outcrops up ahead. When the tires were down to about 15 psi, I was ready to set out. I would be on completely unknown roads as I traversed Camp Wood Road. Today would be spent entirely in the Santa Maria Mountains as I headed northeast. The trail would gradually gain elevation as I reached a spur to the Black Pearl Mine. From there, I would cross into the Prescott National Forest and camp for the night. I would then continue into the Williamson Valley, where a brief highway stretch would take me through Chino Valley and back onto dirt. I would then wind through the Verde Valley, crossing at Perkinsville and completing another brief paved section as I climbed back into the forest and onto the Colorado Plateau. The next 2 days would be heading east through Kaibab and Coconino as I made my way past scenic canyons and meadows before crossing over Highway 89A and I-17. Finally, I would head southeast, reaching Mormon Lake and Stoneman Lake, and ending in the area near Apache-Made Mountain, about 250 miles away from my start point. Now underway, the trail stayed flat and smooth at first. The rolling grasslands soon gave way to rocky hills. It didn't take long and the trail soon began a steady climb. On the other side of the hill, things leveled out briefly and the view instantly improved. This was my first good look at the Santa Maria Mountains, a range filled with boulders and hills, as well as plenty of green vegetation. The trail quickly dropped downhill into Wild Horse Basin and remained fast-moving and in good shape. At the bottom of the hill, I crossed over the quite dry Boulder Creek and resumed a long, steady climb. For the next 6 miles, the trail would climb over 1,300 feet along the edge of Bem Mesa. The road got narrower in places, but was in good condition at first. Each mile further, the view got better and better. It was really incredible. Conditions deteriorated in a few spots and got rocky as the road clung to the side of the volcanic mesa. There were interesting road cuts on one side, and on the other, a healthy drop into the basin below. About 10 miles from the town of Bagdad, the trail came to a split. To the left, Campbellwood Road continued on, which I would take later in the day. To the right here was a spur road to the Black Pearl mine. From this vantage point, a little over a mile up in elevation, the Black Pearl was just visible to my east. I could already see some interesting structures from here, and I was anxious to get closer and check it out further. I stayed right and followed the road as it dropped along the edge of the mesa. It was less traveled than the other road, but generally remained in pretty good shape. At the bottom of the hill, I crossed back over Boulder Creek, which seemed to be a little more true to form here. On the other side, the trail climbed and remained narrow. It soon turned into a gloriously smooth dirt road. I came to an unexpected gate, but luckily it wasn't locked, which was nice. Past here, the road soon deteriorated and was washed out in places. The trail split again at a scenic area known as Bear Flat, and I was now just a mile away from the Black Pearl. From past research, I knew this trail was in rough shape, and I didn't feel like doing any serious damage. It didn't look bad at first, but it would definitely get rougher. I parked the Jeep and put on my hiking boots. I grabbed a camera and my lunch and set out for the Black Pearl. On paper, the hike seemed easy. 1 mile to the mine, 500-foot elevation gain, not too bad. I continued uphill towards the mine and conditions quickly got rougher. Boulders, washouts, and off-camber areas made up the surface. You'll need a pretty capable vehicle to complete this final section of trail. While I think my Jeep probably could do it, I certainly wasn't going to try it fully loaded down and by myself. It was nice to get a little much-needed exercise, and within about half an hour, I crested the hill and arrived at the impressive mine ruins. Perched near the top of Loco Gulch was the Black Pearl Mine, a former tungsten, molybdenite, and iron producer. The expansive tailings pile was dominated by primarily white rocks with a few areas of yellow and red. Numerous structures remained around the property. I grabbed a quick bite to eat before getting on to exploring the ruins. The Black Pearl was first discovered in 1914 by William Connors. Just a year later, it began producing high-grade tungsten ore. From 1915 to 1935, it would produce over 60,000 pounds. Mining methods during this time were crude. All of the work was near the surface and done via a mix of drilling drifts and hand sorting the ore. Nevertheless, it was successful. Interestingly, the mine didn't have any big backers or capital poured into it. Its profits were enough to sustain operations up to this point. In the years following, the mine slipped out of operation as ownership disputes raged on. Shares were sold and the mine ended up in a 50-50 split, with each side disagreeing on how to operate going forward. Meanwhile, the promising mine drew the attention of local investors and companies. By 1951, the Pearl had resumed operations under new ownership. The mine was redeveloped and expanded. In 1953, a road was built from Bagdad and modern equipment was installed. A small mill ran on site to process the ore, which was thought to be around 70,000 tons worth $500,000. However, it seemed like much of the high-grade ore had already been picked out, and the production numbers just weren't sufficient. By fall of 1956, the mine closed again, and the Hillside Mining Company turned its lease back over to private owners. While ownership has changed hands in more recent years, it seems the Black Pearl was not operated any further. I spent a little over an hour walking around the abandoned structures. This included a few outbuildings, some sort of blacksmith shop, and of course, the main attraction, the large headframe. The headframe towers over the ruins of the Black Pearl. It seems like it's seen better days, but it's left relatively intact. The shaft below the headframe, as well as the main adit that goes into the mountainside, were completely filled up with murky-looking water. Other pieces of mining ruins were scattered around the large waste rock pile. The ground, while mostly full of large chunks of rock, were scattered with tons of small shiny pieces of metal. Pyrite, better known as fool's gold, appears to be in no short supply here. However, it was now after 3 p.m. I still had the mile hike back to the Jeep and the short stretch of road back out to Bem Mesa to cover to get back on my route. I left the Black Pearl, which is definitely one of the cooler mines I've been to, and retraced my way downhill. Once back to the Jeep, I was soon loaded up and ready to get back on the road. I proceeded the 2 miles back to the main road. The trail out was quick, mostly smooth, and fun to drive. I soon ended up back on the Shelf Road and made a hard right turn uphill to continue on. From here, the road climbed and was slower going. The surface here was undergoing some kind of maintenance, and a few sections were a little rockier. It didn't take long and the trail soon leveled out and crested the top of the mesa. Conditions were still rocky, but quickly improved as I passed through another gate. From here, the vegetation thinned and gave way to open, grassy areas. I passed through another gate at what seemed to be a pretty active ranching operation. Past the ranch, the road twisted northeast. My pace was slowed through some more rocky sections, but for the most part, these open areas were smooth sailing. It was pretty remote out here, and aside from meeting the local law enforcement, there had been no one else all day. The road crossed into Prescott National Forest, and the pine trees began to make an appearance. I continued northbound. The road then gently dipped into a green valley. Complete with a group of houses and even its own airstrip, I was now passing through an area known as Yolo Ranch. The road turned east and weaved through the trees. It was incredibly scenic through this area as large boulders were just about everywhere amidst the pines. A few miles later, I arrived at another brief historic stop. Camp Wood, the namesake for this road, sits just off County Road 68, and if you're wondering where it is, well, there isn't anything left today. Located on the banks of Pine Creek, Camp Wood was a territorial-era cavalry post. Likely connected somehow with Camp Wallapai further north, not much is known about what happened here. But it was a nice scenic spot. I pressed on from here. My goal was to make camp somewhere in this area. Just a couple miles east along the road, I pulled off onto a lesser trail and quickly found a nice spot. It was just after 6, so there was still plenty of daylight left. After leveling the Jeep, I got to setting things up, which really didn't take long. When this was done, I grabbed my first beer of the trip and sat down to enjoy the view. This was a rather interesting campsite. On one side were gorgeous hills and healthy forest. The other side was burned and otherwise dead. It turns out I was camped right on the edge of the Sheridan fire damage, which burned 20,000 acres of this area last summer. It was eerie but beautiful in its own way, and a great reminder of why I wouldn't be having any campfires this trip due to fire restrictions. The undergrowth is already starting to grow back, but it would take decades to return back to normal. The surrounding views were really gorgeous, and the highest reaches of the Santa Marias rose up in the distance. The flat-topped Cottonwood Mountain sat just to my east. A little before sunset, I fired up the stove to get started on dinner. Tonight, it would be a chicken quesadilla. I started off by cooking my fresh flour tortilla. Annoyingly, it didn't quite fit in my pan. Next up, it was chicken time. I got that warmed and seasoned. Finally, I combined everything back in the pan for the final melting phase. It smelled fantastic, and within minutes was ready to go. Paired up with another beer, I sat down to enjoy this delicious meal. I watched the sun fade from the sky as the surrounding terrain slipped into darkness. Today had been a great day. I covered some new ground and, with a hike earlier, was a tad more exhausted than normal. It didn't take long and I was soon up in the tent. I enjoyed the starry sky for a while, but by 9:30, I had fallen asleep. Tomorrow would be another busy day, and I wanted to make sure I was ready for it. It was just after 6 o'clock when I was up. The morning was cool and quiet as the light of the day slowly lit up camp. I lounged in the tent for a while and enjoyed the view. Last night, I managed to sleep really well. It wasn't windy, and aside from a little bit of traffic on the nearby road, all had been still. Around 7:30, I got started on breakfast. I had a lot of mileage planned, so I didn't want to linger around camp for too long. After whipping up some quick oatmeal and coffee, it was soon off to breaking down camp. Shortly after 8:30, I was all loaded up and ready to get underway in the Jeep. I returned to County Road 68 and proceeded eastbound. It was about 15 miles before getting back to civilization for my next short segment. The road remained wide and smooth. Just a few minutes away from camp, I climbed to a high point and had to stop and check out the view. Looking east was the wide Williamson Valley, where I would end up in just a little bit. I also got my first view of the San Francisco peaks far off on the horizon. Looking back towards camp, the view of the Sheridan fire damage was much more apparent. Continuing east, the trail slowly but steadily dropped downhill. This section was especially scenic. I continued through the burned area for a while, but it eventually gave way to green forest once again. The trail kept dropping, and I passed a few crazy mountain bikers heading uphill. The great views kept up for a while, and the road stayed in great shape. Things slowly became more civilized as I left behind the Santa Maria Mountains and entered into Williamson Valley. The road got wider, although more filled with washboards. Slowly but surely, the forest thinned out and I found myself traversing a wide grassland. It was windy today, with a red flag warning in place, so things were gusty. I arrived at pavement and aired up the tires before proceeding. This would be the first of my 2 planned air-ups today. My next segment would be a 20-mile pavement connector to the other side of Chino Valley. Unfortunately, there were no dirt roads between here and there, but this would save some time. Despite being pavement, this area just north of Prescott was very scenic. After refilling the tank and topping off the cooler, I was soon back on the outskirts of town. Now on Perkinsville Road, I headed east where things soon turned back to dirt. This road sees a lot of traffic and as a result, had a ton of washboards. To keep myself sane, I had to air down again. The road itself wasn't difficult, it's just the Jeep can get quite noisy on roads like this. Things were scenic with some great views of the Black Mountains and Wood Chute Wilderness to the east. This was an area my cousin and I ventured a little further into back in 2015. I passed through grasslands and even saw some pronghorn cross the road. Pronghorns are fairly common throughout the west and are frequently mistaken for antelope. Continuing further east, the road remained flat for a while. Around the 13-mile mark, things got more interesting. Views of the San Francisco peaks and the gorgeous red rocks of Sedona slowly came into view, and got better as I continued on. I crossed back into the Prescott National Forest, and the road curved and climbed through Wildcat Draw. The road reached a high point with an expansive view of the Verde Valley. I had to stop for a minute and take it all in. From here, the trail curves sharply and drops into the bottom of the Verde Valley. At the 19-mile mark, the road arrived at a remote stop sign. To the right was Jerome and Mingus Mountain, but I stayed left to get to the Verde River and the mostly abandoned town of Perkinsville. I passed a small ranching area and dropped towards a narrow bridge over the Verde. I crossed the Verde River, which was flowing. I stayed right past the bridge to get closer to the historic train depot the town is known for. But after weaving through some trees along the banks of the river, I soon found myself at a locked gate with no trespassing signs. I headed deeper into the trees to see if there was another way around. Unfortunately, there wasn't. It turns out that all the buildings in Perkinsville, abandoned or otherwise, sit on private property, and the only way to see them was from higher up on the trail or along the railroad line. This railroad, known as the Arizona Central Line, runs from a cement plant in Drake to the town of Clarkdale. Originally completed in 1913 for $1.2 million, its purpose was to support the mines of Jerome. Perkinsville was established as a water stop along the line and supplied lime from its quarries to the smelter in Clarkdale. Operations lasted until the 1950s when the smelters closed and the locomotives switched over to diesel. The town was never big, but it was also used as a filming location for the 1960s film How the West Was Won. Nowadays, the town is abandoned except for a few locals, and the only tourists allowed to arrive are on the Verde Canyon Railroad. Still wanting to find a spot to look at the Verde, I relocated. On a warm summer day with temperatures in the low 90s, this was a pretty popular spot. I found a nice section and sat along the banks for a few minutes. The river here was flowing but quite muddy. The Verde flows southeast for 170 miles to its meeting with the Salt just outside of Phoenix. This spot here also marked the lowest elevation of my entire trip at around 3,800 feet. Unfortunately, the popularity meant that this spot was hardly quiet and serene. I grabbed a quick snack and soon returned to the Jeep and got back on the trail north. I crossed the railroad tracks and began the long climb out of the Verde Valley. It was 2 o'clock and I still had about 65 miles to get to my planned campsite for the night. For the next 9 miles, the trail headed north and west. It continued to curve and climb through some relatively scenic areas. This last section through Prescott National Forest featured some more open grasslands and eventually gave way to thicker vegetation. The miles continued to tick by. In the absolute middle of nowhere, the road turned to pavement once again. I decided to do a quick air up just in case. This paved connector was 16 miles long and would climb nearly 3,000 vertical feet. It would take me up onto the Colorado Plateau for the remainder of my trip. While a few pavement miles would have been perfectly okay on aired down tires, the 16 miles seemed like it was just a bit too much. And I certainly didn't want another flat tire like last year's trip. Once this was done, I continued northbound. The road climbed and quickly crossed into Yavapai County and entered into Kaibab National Forest. With every mile forward, the temperature got slightly cooler, leaving behind the warmer Verde Valley. I I eventually turned off the pavement and headed east along Forest Road 110. I aired down again since the next 2 days would be exclusively on dirt. The road really wasn't much to write home about. It sees a ton of traffic and its gravel surface was typically fast moving. I cruised along quickly, trying to make good time to camp. Past White Horse Lake, which seemed packed, I continued north. Things remained easy, although full of washboards. A few miles down the road, I came across a turnoff that was intriguing. I pulled into Sycamore Canyon Overlook and figured I had time for a quick stop. After a short hike, I soon found myself at the rim of the canyon. While not very wide at this point, the view was certainly impressive. Columns of rocks made up the steep walls, and the area was covered with a thick layer of trees. At the mouth of the canyon sat a large rock drop known as Sycamore Falls. This 70-foot drop flows seasonally, but must be really impressive when it does. It is also a popular rock climbing spot. While there was some water at the bottom, it seemed pretty dry otherwise. I enjoyed the view for a few minutes before returning back uphill to the Jeep. I continued north for about 5 miles. The road remained uneventful and busy. I stayed right onto Forest Road 141, and the gravel turned to a reddish dirt. I proceeded eastbound, and the trail soon opened up. This was Garland Prairie. With views of the San Francisco peaks and some other surrounding mountains, it was really something. I don't know what it is, but something about open expanses like this get me really excited. I continued east through the prairie. At about equal latitude as the city of Flagstaff, this point marked the northernmost reach of my entire adventure. The area is relatively populated and is home to numerous ranches. I passed sheep, goats, and some other animals as I weaved through. What appeared to be several abandoned homesteads also dot the prairie. A brief pavement section was followed by a return to dirt roads underneath a power line. It was now almost 6 o'clock and I still had over 25 miles to cover to get to camp. Leaving the populated area, the views opened up briefly and the road condition soon changed. I was now in my third national forest of the trip, the Coconino. This section of trail had numerous tracks, and the surface appeared to be severely torn up. This certainly slowed me down. It wasn't difficult, it just took some time to navigate. I picked my way south on Forest Road 527. And this went on for some time. The road would smooth out briefly and then enter another beaten up or rocky section. I meandered east as the lesser traveled road curved through the forest. It was scenic, green, and felt remote. A brief rocky area marked another section close to the rim of Sycamore Canyon. Past the 7-mile mark, things got progressively easier and faster. I traveled along Forest Road 538, and 14 miles from Garland Prairie, I arrived at a major junction. This was Forest Road 231. Now about 10 miles away from my intended campsite, and with far easier road to navigate, I decided to take a gamble and try to make it before sunset. I followed 231 south and picked up the pace. This trail is surprisingly scenic and travels through a brief section of the West Fork of Oak Creek Canyon. The road soon fell into the shadows. With lots of curves and elevation changes, I thought I made good time heading south. As I approached the final section towards East Pocket, better known as the end of the world, I quickly came to the realization that I wasn't the only one that wanted to camp here. As I headed east, campsite after campsite had already been claimed. The area has tons of dispersed camping spots that overlook Sedona and the secret mountain wilderness. But trail after trail, it seemed like I was too late, which was kind of surprising since it was a Tuesday evening in the middle of a pandemic. Regardless, the light was now fading fast, and I continued east, trying to salvage a decent spot. I ended up on a fun side trail that got interesting, but there was nothing here. I turned around and began the drive of shame back west. It was certainly a busy area with lots of traffic still moving in and out. Just before 8 o'clock, I pulled off on a side road in the area and found a suitable spot. It wasn't the big view I was hoping for, but located half a mile from the rim of the canyon, it was going to have to work. I got camp set up in record time. Almost immediately, I began work on dinner. I figured something nice was in order to help lighten the mood. I fired up the stove and got the ribeye cooking. The fantastic smells permeated the air almost immediately. After a little while, I got some water boiling for the potatoes. Dinner came together rather quickly, and half an hour after getting to camp, I was ready to eat. It would be steak and potatoes, and for the vegetables, a nice side of hops. I sat down in the dark to eat. It was incredible. For dessert, it would be a little bit of whiskey, which of course was also very enjoyable. The evening ended up being really nice. I eventually got up into the tent around 9:30 and was off to bed by 10. After another busy day and covering 136 miles from my last camp, it certainly didn't take long to drift asleep. I was up right at sunrise. Outside, it was calm and quiet, aside from the occasional helicopter flying in the distance. From the thick trees, you would never know you're less than half a mile from the rim of Secret Canyon. I stayed up in the tent and ended up dozing off for another couple hours, which was perfectly okay because I wasn't in a big rush this morning. I eventually made it up and around, and by about 9:30, got started on breakfast. Today I figured I would break it up and try my hand at some over easy eggs. This went surprisingly well, and after making something adjacent to toast, I was ready to eat. The eggs had turned out just right, and this had ended up being a pretty decent breakfast. It was soon time for dishes and packing up camp. This spot turned out to be pretty decent. There was a lot of traffic on the main road, but most of the night had been calm with little to no wind to speak of. The views weren't terrible either. After chatting with a guy who passed by my camp, who was curious about my tent and had also visited my website in the past, I got the tent packed away. It was just after 11 when I was finally ready to roll. Talk about a lazy morning.
Good morning. Day number 3 is about to get underway. So I just chatted with a guy named Paul who passed by my camp. He had camped down at the rim last night and said it was pretty windy. So I guess it kind of worked out that we stayed here. Not the greatest view, but I think it worked out okay. So I think what we're actually going to do is head down the spur trail here to the rim, check out the view now that it's daylight, and then once we're done there, kind of retrace our way back up north. As long as we make a little bit of mileage today, relax, have a good time, and get to camp at a much more reasonable hour, then everything will be okay.
I rolled out of camp and headed south. I figured since I was here, I had to check out the scenic view everyone comes here for. The trail meandered through some trees and particularly green vegetation. The forest cleared as I approached the rim, and the end of the world came into view. I parked the Jeep and got out to take it all in. The view was all it was cracked up to be. Below the rim, much of the area lies within the Red Rock Secret Mountain Wilderness area. In the distance sat Sedona and many of its iconic red rock formations. I could see Bell Rock, Courthouse Rock, and Capitol Butte. This viewpoint sits at about 6,900 feet in elevation, over 2,000 feet above Sedona. Far off on the horizon was Pine Mountain and Tule Mesa, located over 40 miles away on the other side of the Verde Valley. I can certainly see why people flock to this area. It's downright breathtaking. I enjoyed the view for a while. It was a little bit gusty, and there were still a few people camped out in the area. I decided to proceed back northbound from here. I got back on Forest Road 231. Things remained smooth and easy. The road was busy, with people continuing to stream in and out of the area. A few miles further along, I was stopped yet again. I crossed a place called Furno Draw and had to check something out. Up this road sits a Forest Service cabin, and it was one I've been to before. Way back in 2010, this cabin was the very first rooms with a view cabin I ever stayed at. Naturally, it holds a special place to me, and since I was so close, I had to check it out again. Located in a scenic draw, Furno Cabin sits at the end of a quiet road. Although closed to the public at this time, I didn't expect to find anyone here. To my surprise, a few forest employees were sitting on the porch of the cabin. After chatting, they soon left and invited me to sit on the porch and walk around the outside. Furno was originally used as a guard station for fire crews. The first cabin was built in the 1970s, but ironically burned in a forest fire. Rebuilt in 1979, the current cabin served the same purpose. It was built using logs on site, and a mixture of salt, mud, and dirt was used to fill in the middle, much like the early pioneers would have done. However, after finding that the local cattle took a liking to this mixture, it was soon replaced with concrete. Furno was open to the public in the 90s and has been reservable ever since. This is certainly a rustic structure located in the middle of nowhere. While it was locked up currently, some old pictures dug up from 2010 will show you the small kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a loft area on the inside. It was really a trip down memory lane and neat to see this old cabin again. I soon hiked back to the Jeep and got back on the road. I continued on my route, not sure what exactly the plan was. I wanted to cover a few miles, but keep the day slow-paced and relaxing. I followed 231 northbound as it dipped back into the west fork of Oak Creek Canyon. The drive in the daytime was incredibly scenic. Seven miles later, I arrived back at the junction from yesterday. I stayed right to head east on 536. The road remained fast-moving and scenic. After a couple of additional miles, I entered a nice area surrounded by open meadows and Fry Lake. This seemed like a great spot. It wasn't too busy, and there was enough in the nearby area to check out. It was just after 2 o'clock, but today was meant to be slow-paced and relaxing. So, this was camp. I parked the Jeep and enjoyed a quick lunch. Afterwards, I set out for a short hike to explore the surrounding area. To the south was a small meadow. With tall grass and a few big trees in the middle, it was really nice. On the other side of camp was a much larger clearing. This area was part of Fry Park, and although not visible from the ground, contained a small area of water known as Fry Lake. The term lake might be an overstatement here, but nonetheless, it was gorgeous. There were also views of Humphreys Peak to the north. I made it back to camp and soon got things set up. I popped open the tent and got the rest of my gear ready. It was really nice to not be rushed. At this point, there were still 3 hours of daylight remaining, so I took the rare opportunity to grab a beer and hop up in the tent to do some reading. The downtime was a great change of pace. This campsite sits at 7,400 feet, and with a cool breeze blowing through the pines, it was close to perfect. By about 6:30, it was time to start on dinner. I once again fired up the old stove. Tonight's meal would be a little simpler, but I was feeling inspired by my visit to Furno earlier. Once the rice was warmed up, I threw in the kielbasa, and for a little bit of extra flavor, a little beer as well. Everything cooked up quick. Dinner was served alongside the optional side of Cheese Whiz for the kielbasa. Might sound kinda gross, but this was one of the snacks we had at Furno 10 years ago. Something about that fake cheese taste combined with kielbasa grease that really brings back the memories. After dinner, the light began to fade. The thick trees surrounding camp quickly fell into darkness. It certainly would have been a great night for a fire as the chilly air blew through. Before heading to bed, I of course had to enjoy a little more whiskey. By about 9, I had made it back up to the tent and was off to bed sometime after. "10 hours later, I was up the following morning. Things were once again calm. Last night, I slept great. It was definitely the chilliest night of the trip, but I managed to stay bundled up. Shortly after getting up and around, I got some water boiling for breakfast. I let the coffee steep and mixed up some oatmeal. With breakfast done, I turned my attention to breaking down camp. I got the tent collapsed and packed back up. After some dishes, the rest of camp was soon broken down. I made sure the area was all cleaned up and hopped in the Jeep. Returning to Forest Road 536, I continued to the east. The road skirted around the scenic Fry Park. There were a few more great campsites, and this was certainly an area I'd like to return to. I was now headed for Highway 89A, which I would cross over briefly and then continue east over to I-17 to resupply. The road got progressively busier but remained fast moving. I climbed briefly before beginning the quick descent into Oak Creek. Along this section, I heard an odd noise from the back of the Jeep. It sounded like a fuse just blew, and almost immediately my battery gauge tanked. There didn't seem to be any other issues, and the Jeep was running smoothly otherwise. A little ways down the trail, I confirmed the issue, which was related to the battery box. The last 2 days I was recharging a lot of tech, and the lack of driving the Jeep meant my second battery was now needing a deep recharge. This meant my air compressor and recharging ability was temporarily down. I did have one extra fuse with me, but I didn't want to immediately replace it and run into the same exact problem. I wanted to give the battery some more time to recharge. I kept an eye on the issue as I continued along. This section of road was really nice, and there were some great views of Oak Creek Canyon. The road twisted and turned downhill, dropping nearly 1,000 feet in 3 miles. This area was packed with people camping out. At the bottom of the hill, I emerged at Highway 89A. My next segment of trail was just half a mile to the north. I cruised on the highway very briefly and was soon turning off onto Forest Road 237. This 5-mile trail connects 89A and I-17 and seemed to be a great way to save some time. Off the highway, the road remained wide and smooth. I passed by a few different designated camping areas which all appeared to be quite busy. The trail twisted and turned and soon entered into Fry Canyon where conditions rapidly changed. Now narrow and rocky, I crossed the creek bed and climbed out the other side. This section was not maintained for low clearance vehicles. The trail remained a mix of smooth sections and a few slower, rocky sections. I crossed the creek one more time and began to climb out of the canyon on the other side. The climb was a bit rougher in places, but I didn't quite get to the point of putting it in 4 low. The change of terrain was nice. This had pretty much been the roughest driving of the trip so far, but still wasn't anything crazy. I continued uphill as the road remained rocky for a while. It got progressively smoother, and at the 5-mile mark, I returned to the dilapidated pavement. Following the road downhill, I soon found myself driving alongside I-17, just south of Flagstaff. I pulled into the busy gas station and topped off the tank and cooler for the final time. I noticed a free air fill-up, and since my air compressor was temporarily down, decided to play it safe and air up now. This would allow me to save my last fuse as an emergency backup if I really needed to use it. Unfortunately, I wasn't the only one with this idea, and after waiting over half an hour, I finally got my turn to air up the tires. After checking my maps, I also decided a slight route modification was needed due to the extended stop here. My planned route was supposed to take me back to dirt roads on the other side of I-17 and then head south to Mormon Lake from there. I figured since I was already at the highway and aired up, a quick cruise down to Munns Park and east from there would take me to the same exact point. This would save me a few miles, but more importantly, buy me some time and allow me to continue on schedule. It was the last night of the trip, and I certainly didn't feel like setting up camp in the dark. Just 10 minutes later, I was in Munns Park. I continued east, past the golf courses and cabins, and was soon back to dirt. It was about 1:30, and I felt confident I would be able to cover the 40 miles from here to my last camp at Apache Maid in the Stoneman Lake area. The road continued east, and I stayed aired up for now. Forest Road 240 remained smooth and easygoing. It was about 12 miles from here to Mormon Lake. The road passed along the edge of Kasner Park and then made a sharp left and climbed. Up to this point, the drive had been busy, with lots of people camped out and vehicles moving through the area. The trail continued to curve through the forest. The surface remained easy, but the trail did have a few short rocky sections and plenty of washboards. I know that I love talking about washboards, but they can be really annoying at times. From here, the road began a long uphill section. The forest was really thick in this area, and I eventually crested the hill, topping out just over 7,500 feet. This was the highest elevation of my entire trip. Almost immediately, the road soon dipped, dropping back downhill. 12 miles from Munns Park, the trees thinned, and I arrived at a paved road on the edge of Mormon Lake. I continued north to a scenic overlook. Mormon Lake is a 12 square mile natural basin surrounded by low hills. The lake bed was full of yellow and green grass, but there was one important thing missing: any sign of water. Mormon Lake has the unique distinction of being Arizona's largest natural lake, sometimes. As far as I could see, this seasonal lake didn't feature any water. It appeared to be more marshland than anything else. Named for Mormon settlers who arrived in this area in 1878 and established a dairy, the lake today is really just a scenic stop for most. Some kind of animals, either elk or deer, were out grazing near the middle. I enjoyed the windy viewpoint and grabbed a quick snack before continuing south. Now on my final pavement stretch, this road would take me about 15 miles south to Stoneman Lake. Along the way, I passed by the village of Mormon Lake, located on the shores and in the lake bed itself. With its own stores, lodge, airstrip, and RV park, this seemed to be a hive of activity. I continued south, following Lake Mary Road as it climbed through the forest. Just after 3 o'clock, I was pulling off the paved road at Stoneman Lake Road. This would be my final dirt stretch as I drove to the lake and explored the area around Apache Made Mountain for the rest of today and first half of tomorrow. Forest Road 213 headed west and remained very wide and smooth. The road was incredibly busy, with everything from minivans being towed out to fellow rooftop tent enthusiasts. I was able to make good time as the road gently climbed and twisted through Coconino. Six miles from the paved road, I pulled into the Stoneman Lake Overlook. This lake is much smaller than Mormon Lake, but did appear to at least have a little bit of water. It didn't seem very deep, and the surface was predominantly marshland. Located in a small basin, it is thought that the lake formed in the remains of a volcanic crater or sinkhole. It is very scenic, and numerous cabins line the northern and eastern shoreline. There were also a few picnic tables and a bathroom, although the latter was currently closed. From the lake, I continued on the forest road as it headed west and soon descended. The road turned south and eventually came across an intersection with the road out to I-17. I pushed further south towards Apache Made Mountain, which soon came into view. Apache Made is quite literally a bump on the map. The former volcanic vent, one of several in the Mormon volcanic field, rises up out of the otherwise flat terrain surrounding it. The trail continued south, getting narrower in places. The surface was mostly smooth, with a few areas of embedded rocks. The road came to a nice shady spot, and I was soon crossing the small bridge over Foster Canyon. After traveling through some grasslands, I stayed right to follow along the northern side of Apache Made. The road was incredibly scenic as it headed west. I passed another narrow bridge and a few nice camping spots. This was the area I was hoping to camp at, but I continued on briefly to see what was further down the trail. Slowly but surely, the road began to drop in elevation and the conditions deteriorated. The road split and things were narrow as the rocky trail curved around Apache Made. It was slower going, but really beautiful. The trail split again and turned to two-track on the west side of the mountain. I parked and surveyed the area. I found some kind of stream gauge along one of the spurs, as well as some more great views. From here, the red rocks of Sedona and the scenic canyons I had seen just a couple days ago were visible once more to the west. It certainly felt more remote on this side of Apache Made. The roads were less traveled and it wasn't nearly as busy as Stoneman Lake. The vegetation also thinned out for the most part. The pine forest gave way to juniper bushes and grassland. I returned to the Jeep. It was now around 4:30. While this was a gorgeous area, I was hoping to find a camp with a little more cover. And I had passed one on the way in that would work perfectly. I retraced my way back out through the scenic grasslands. The trail got progressively easier as it returned to well-traveled roads. Just a mile from my last stop, I pulled off the main road and found camp. Located in a patch of trees and on a slight rise, I had an excellent view of the forest just north of me. This area was perfect for my last night and was possibly even the best of the trip. I enjoyed the view for a minute before getting camp set up. Shortly after 5, I got to work. I leveled the Jeep and got the tent opened up one more time. Everything was soon set up, and I sat down to enjoy the first beer of the evening. Located at 6,300 feet, the weather was cool with a light breeze. Some early season monsoon clouds were building up on the horizon, but they were no factor. The trees around camp provided the perfect amount of cover, and Apache Made Mountain rose up just to the south. It really was a perfect evening. Aside from the occasional traffic on the nearby road, things were exceptionally quiet. It was nice relaxing and enjoying some more downtime around camp. After the sun sunk a little further in the sky, it was time for dinner. Tonight would be a repeat meal. The chicken quesadilla from night 1 of the trip was just too good not to do again. I repeated the process, first warming up the tortilla and then packing it with chicken and cheese. Things came together real quick, and I was soon sitting down to eat this deliciousness. I watched as the last light of the day hit the trees. Just before 8 o'clock, the sun had finally set. Despite being the last night of the trip, I wasn't really that tired. I enjoyed a late evening at camp with a little more whiskey and a whole lot of stars. It was about 10 when I got up in the tent and finally hit the hay. The following morning, I was up just before 8. The night had been fantastic, and I ended up sleeping really hard. I enjoyed the view from the tent for a while. The San Francisco peaks were just visible in the distance. After mustering up the motivation to get out of the tent, I soon set to work on breakfast. Today would be mopping up what was left in the cooler. I passed on the Spam and got an over-easy egg and tortilla cooked. After a cup of coffee, I spent the next hour getting things cleaned up. I got the dishes done and worked on packing up the tent and back of the Jeep. I wasn't in a big rush today, since I only had a little more mileage to cover before getting on the highway home.
Alright, so day number 5 now. We are on the last day of our trip. It's unbelievable that it's already almost over. Had a good night last night, slept really good. Weather was nice, I'd say low 50s, upper 40s maybe. So there's one more historic structure I want to check out here in the Apache Made area before heading back home. So we've got a little bit more trail to get there, and then from there we'll be retracing the few miles back to pavement and begin on the drive home. The trip is winding down, but we do have a little bit more time up here to enjoy and explore, and it should be pretty neat.
I got back on the trail and headed east. My last stop was just a ways down the trail, near the base of Apache Made. I continued south onto Forest Road 229, and things remained mostly easygoing. I passed some cattle and twisted through some more forest. After nearly missing my turnoff, I weaved along my final side trip. The road remains rutted out as it follows Rocky Gulch. At the end of the road, I arrived at my destination, a rather large homestead at the base of Apache Made Mountain. This is an area known colloquially as T-Bar Ranch. The multi-room structure that remains is impressive. I walked through the numerous rooms inside. The westernmost room featured floor tiles and a fireplace, with mementos stacked on top of the mantel. There were also some old pictures pinned to the wall. From the pictures, it seemed like this room was the original structure built on site. Substantial additions were eventually completed to further expand the homestead. The building contained a slightly more modern kitchen, complete with sink, cabinets, and concrete flooring. Some kind of pantry and collapsed root cellar remained closest to the hill. The back half of the cabin featured numerous additional rooms. With what appeared to be a hallway, there were 3 small rooms with wood flooring. A larger master suite sat at the end of the building. It was clear that this was built in many parts. A nice porch wraps around most of the structure. The side porch is in decent shape with some wood decking, but the front has seen better days. It's interesting to see the materials that were used to construct some of the building. Unfortunately, not much is known about the history behind this place. The original structure appears to be quite old, possibly built in the late 1800s. The rest of the additions are more modern and could date from the early to mid 1900s. The Babbitts, famous Arizona cattle ranchers, built and operated a ranch out of a nearby building, but it is unclear if T-Bar was associated with it. Either way, It was a neat place, and the running cattle outside made it easy to imagine what life was like here back in the day. The view out the front door was downright stunning. A meadow juts up to the base of Apache-Made Mountain. From here, the lookout tower was visible at the top. The tower and summit of the mountain is accessible via a 2.5-mile trail that sharply climbs to the top. Depending on the time of year, the road can be gated near the summit and require a short hike. I have actually been up there a couple of times, and the view is certainly worth it if you've never been. Since I had been up Apache-Made as recently as October, I figured this spot at the ranch was the perfect turnaround. From here, I retraced my path back out to the main road. I continued north 4 miles back to Stoneman Lake Road. The drive was easy, and I tried to savor every remaining minute of dirt. I eventually turned left, and the dirt road gave way to pavement. I followed the road 8 miles west as it dropped towards I-17 and the road home. This trip had been phenomenal. The 250 miles from Bagdad to Apache-Made had featured a little bit of everything. From the grass-covered mesas of the Santa Marias and the lush Verde Valley, to the open expanses and scenic canyons of the Colorado Plateau, the incredible scenery on this trip was constantly changing. With stops at an abandoned mine, scenic cabin, and historic homestead, there had been no shortage of places to explore either. It was great to be able to cover some new trails, and the combination of great campsites and perfect weather throughout my 5 days made it that much more enjoyable. It's been a while since I did a proper trip through central and northern Arizona, and I feel like this adventure did a great job of covering the wide variety this area offers. I really do appreciate you watching this special and subscribing if you'd like to see more like it. To learn more about the trails featured on this trip, you can head over to our website for more info. As always, we'll be back with more trips, historic spots, and vehicle projects in the future. And we'll see you on the next one.
Good morning. So day 5, good morning. Test. Pretty fun 5-day trip planned for this as I head east to ultimately camp series as I head east all the way over to the... So I know with quarantine and everything, toilet paper has been a little bit in short supply, but I want to show you something I found just up here. there's no need to worry because it literally grows on trees. I didn't put that there, by the way. There's probably a big shortage because everyone keeps leaving it out here in the middle of nowhere. Kind of a bummer, but I guess if you need some really bad, there it is. But I would encourage you, if you have the means, you're not too grossed out by it, maybe spend a few minutes trying to pick up trash around camp. I try to at every campsite I go to. It's not to brag or anything. I just want to do my part to try and make it a little bit better for the next person that comes by. So if you can do the same, great. If not, then just don't leave it out here. Simple as that.